She married him to save her family's name. But in Blackthornne Manor, her husband wears a mask he never removes. And when the storm bells toll after midnight, every door is locked, because something walks the halls that should not exist. The sky wept on the morning of her wedding. Silver rain fell over the dark spires of Blackthornne Manor, streaking the stained glass windows with liquid light. Altheira watched the rain through the carriage slit, feeling each drop as if it tapped upon her ribs. She had packed only what fit into a cedar trunk: a few dresses, a worn book of hymns from her mother, the tiny embroidered handkerchief she'd stitched at 12. It made a small pile for a life, but debts made everything smaller. Her family had once kept a house filled with music and summer parties. Lately, the music had gone quiet. Creditors became regular callers. The vines on the garden wall were untended. When the last letter arrived, pay at once or forfeit the property, her father stopped speaking at dinner. 2 days later, a sealed offer came from Blackthornne. Dareon, lord of the moor, would settle all accounts if Altheira became his bride. She had asked gently if there were other ways. Her mother's eyes had shone with pride and sorrow together. "You were born with a tender heart," her mother had told her, "and sometimes kindness can hold a family together more strongly than gold if it is given to the right man." Her father hadn't spoken then, but he'd squeezed Altheira's hand until it ached, a silent apology she took with her into the carriage. The wheels hit a rut and jolted her back to the present. They had left the village miles behind, the last sign of it a shriveled wreath of rowan berries tied to a waypost, protection against ill luck. The coachman crossed himself when they passed it. The footman glanced at Altheira and then away, as if he'd seen something he ought not to. They paused once at a lone inn at the edge of the moor. The innkeeper's wife brought broth and hot bread and could not seem to stop looking at Altheira's face. "You're going on," she said at last, not a question. To him. "To Lord Blackthornne," Altheira answered. Politeness cost nothing. "Yes." The woman put the bowl down very carefully, as if the table might tilt and spill everything. "He's a good payer, keeps to his own. You won't want for anything in that house." She swallowed. "Mind the storm bells. If they ring after midnight, bolt your door and pray till dawn." "Why would they?" Altheira began. But the innkeeper coughed loudly, and the woman only muttered something about weather, and that was the end of it. By the time the manor rose from the heather, rain had deepened to a steady curtain. It stood black and elegant against a nervous sky, chimneys vomiting smoke, windows lit like watchful eyes. A line of servants waited beneath the portico. Their uniforms were spotless. Their faces were careful. Altheira descended. Her ivory gown drank the damp. The steward introduced himself as Hollis and led her into a foyer that smelled faintly of beeswax and storm. Oil portraits watched from paneled walls, lords and ladies rendered in old paint, their expressions somewhere between stern and curious. A grandfather clock ticked in the hall like a heartbeat that had learned iron discipline. The chapel had been prepared on short notice. A long runner, candles packed close for warmth, the small altar draped in white. There were few guests: a magistrate, 2 neighboring landholders who kept glancing at the doors, and a handful of servants to swell the numbers. The pews creaked when they sat, as if the wood itself felt the weather. He waited at the altar. Dareon stood clothed in midnight, black coat with silver stitching, high collar, gloves. Upon his face, a mask of dark steel, not theatrical, not gaudy, but exacting, fitted as if forged for him alone. It concealed brow and cheeks and the bridge of his nose, leaving only the eyes and the strong line of his mouth uncovered. The eyes were what struck her, steady, guarded, and old in a way that did not measure years. Candlelight found them and could not decide whether they were gray or green. She bowed her head because she could think of nothing else to do. When he reached for her hand, the glove was cool against her skin. His grip was careful, almost formal. The magistrate cleared his throat and began, voice rising and falling with practiced rhythm. Words Altheira had heard at happier weddings slipped into place. Honor, keep, comfort, forsake all others. She answered when prompted, her voice clear enough to carry. Somewhere, beneath the steady cadence, a bell tolled from the manor's high tower, the sound deep and mournful as thunder in a cavern. When it came time for rings, Dareon's hand trembled. Only a little, no more than the flicker of a candle in a draught, but she felt it. He set the band upon her finger and said his I do in a voice that sounded like stone warmed by sun, unyielding and not unkind. By these vows, the magistrate proclaimed, before God and witness. Lightning found the stained glass and made it blaze. The room flashed blue-white. Someone sucked in a breath. Altheira's heart jerked, then settled. The rain did not pause. They signed the book. A servant produced a cloth for the excess ink. When it was done, Dareon inclined his head to the magistrate, to the neighbors, to the steward. He did not kiss his bride. He did not lift the veil to look upon her face more closely. He stood for a beat, as if measuring the shape of the moment, and then offered Altheira his arm to lead her through the receiving line. Congratulations came like drops from a leaky eave, carefully timed, never enough to soak. One neighbor offered a hedged wish for fair seasons. The other mentioned horses and the need to repair the south pasture fence. The servants curtsied or bowed with lowered eyes. Only Hollis, the steward, managed something warmer. "Welcome to Blackthornne, my lady. If you desire anything, books, tea, air, I will see it found." "Thank you," Altheira said, and meant it. They dined in a smaller hall afterward, to avoid the draught in the great one. The table stretched longer than the little company required. Soups steamed, bread cracked under knives. Dareon kept his gloves. The mask stayed. He addressed the magistrate with precise courtesy, the neighbors with measured interest. When Altheira spoke, about the gardens in her old home, about the way the acacia bloomed in late summer, he listened, head slightly tilted, but offered nothing of himself beyond the occasional observation that showed he had heard her. "Acacia take a pruning better in late winter. Or, there's a sheltered wall in the east court. It would please you." His eyes met hers once, just once. Candlelight wavered in them, and for a heartbeat she had the strange sense of looking down into a well and seeing not only her reflection, but constellations burning in water. Then a footman spilled wine, and the moment closed, like a book. As evening fell and the last guest's carriage rattled away into the rain, the house settled. Doors latched. Fireplaces were banked. The clock's heartbeat grew loud again, marking the border between day and whatever came after it. Hollis led Altheira to the ceremonial bridal chamber. "Tradition," he explained softly, as if the word needed gentleness. "You will find everything in readiness." He hesitated. "If you should require anything—" "I will ring," she said, and touched his sleeve in thanks. He left bowing, relief and pity warring on his face. The chamber was vast. Velvet curtains enclosed a bed meant for a queen. A fire burned low, making the carved posts throw long, uneasy shadows. A bowl of white roses stood on the mantel. Their scent mingled with the damp wool of her cloak and the old smoke breathed by the walls. Dareon entered a few moments later. He did not come close. He stood with the firelight lapping at the edges of his coat, the mask giving him a profile both noble and inhuman. Up close, the workmanship was exquisite. Hammered steel worked into a pattern so subtle she could not name it, something like leaves or perhaps waves, the metal learning how to soften without bending. "You are my wife," he said quietly, almost as if the words cost him. "Blackthornne is yours to command. Hollis will see to your wishes. The East Library is warmest at dawn. The tower rooms should be avoided in high wind." "I will remember," she said. Her voice did not tremble. She was proud of that. He inclined his head, the smallest bow. "I ask one thing only, Altheira." The first time he spoke her name, he made it sound like an oath. "Ask me nothing of what lies beneath this mask. Press me not to reveal it, and you will be safe." A small fire lit in her chest at the word. Safe from what? She wanted to ask, and did. Safe. From what? He looked past her then, toward the window where rain braided the glass. The pause stretched just long enough for her to know the answer mattered. When he spoke, it was with the care of a man stepping around a sleeping beast. "From truth, that will do neither of us kindness tonight." It was not an answer. It was a warning wrapped in velvet. "I see," she said, though she did not. He glanced once at the bed's closed curtains, at the untouched roses, at the clock that had not missed a beat since she entered the house. "Rest," he said. "Storms travel quickly on the moor. Tomorrow may be clearer." He turned then. The cloak swung, a dark tide. He reached the door, paused with his hand on the latch, and spoke without facing her. "You will not be harmed here." The words were iron laid across the threshold. "Not by me." The door closed softly. The sound was gentler than she expected. It echoed anyway. Altheira sat on the edge of the bed, fingers knotted in silk, listening to the silence he left behind. Somewhere in the bones of the house, wind moved. The rain found a seam and tapped it. From far above, the tower bell gave a single, low breath, as if testing its own voice and deciding no, not tonight. She rose and drew back a corner of the curtain. The mattress had the untouched look of something staged for a painting. She let the fabric fall. The roses on the mantel were too white. Duty had brought her here. Debt had wed her hands. But as she lay down alone in the ceremonial bed of Blackthornne Manor, staring at the warm, dim ceiling while the storm wrote its name across the windows, it was not duty she felt most sharply. It was the weight of a mystery that pressed into her like a second pillow, shapeless and heavy, refusing sleep. She closed her eyes and tried to picture Dareon without the mask. What rose in her mind was not a face. It was a feeling, a cold river running beneath a summer field, steady and hidden, dangerous only if you stepped without looking. Sometime near dawn, she dreamed the tower bell rang 3 times after midnight, and every door in the house slid its bolts home. In the dream, no one told her why. In the morning, she would find out what questions Blackthornne permitted, and which ones the manor itself refused to answer. Days passed in the silence of Blackthornne Manor. Altheira learned quickly that her husband was a man of distance. He sat at the head of the dining table, but never removed his gloves. The mask never shifted, never slipped. When meals were served, he touched little, sometimes nothing at all. His gaze, when she felt it upon her, was sharp as steel, but as remote as the depths of the sea. She tried, gently at first, to cross the space between them. She asked about the estate and was given exacting answers: acreage, crop rotations, the temperament of certain stallions, as if she were reading ledgers. She asked what music he preferred. "Whatever leaves the house untroubled," he said, and it might have been a joke if his voice hadn't been so careful. When she asked about himself, he closed the door with politeness. "There is little worth speaking of, yet distance is not the same as cruelty." On the morning she went to the East Court in a break of sky, the storm returned without warning. A stallion in the paddock broke free, eyes rolling at the thunder. Altheira stumbled back on wet flagstone. Hooves flashed. Dareon was suddenly there, as if the storm had pulled him from stone. His gloved hand caught her waist. His body shielded hers until the grooms took the horse away. For a breathless moment, she met his intense gaze, her heart thudding against her ribs. "You should not walk alone when the storms come," he murmured, close enough that she felt the warmth of him even through the cold mask. "You saved me," she managed. His hand withdrew. The space between them reasserted itself like a law. "No, I only prevented loss, that is all." Still, she began to see the outline of a man beneath iron. Books she had admired in the library appeared at her bedside the next day, ribboned open to the gentle passages. A mug of herbal tea, exactly the kind her mother brewed for headaches, arrived without being requested. At dusk, she sometimes heard the piano from the great hall. Not showy pieces, but spare melodies with aching spaces between notes. She stood in the corridor and listened, hands clenched to keep from going in. When she did once, on an impulse, the music ceased, as if a candle had been pinched out. She stepped into the hall, cheeks warm with the embarrassment of being the cause of silence. Dareon stood from the bench, bowed slightly, and left without a word. The servants knew more than they said. Their eyes darted when she passed. Trays were left outside the door of his private tower chamber late at night, as though they did not dare enter. Once, returning from the library after midnight, Altheira stopped at the sight of deep scratches in the door's oak, 4 long curves, gouged into the grain with brutal force. She touched one. Her finger came away clean, but the mark felt recent, as if the wood still remembered pain. That first night, as Hollis lit the lamps in her chamber, he lingered longer than usual. "My lady," he said carefully, "there is one rule I must tell you plainly. If the bells sound after midnight, you must stay within your room, bolt the door, and do not venture out until dawn." "Why?" Altheira asked. He bowed his head. "Because they are not meant for you." And he left before she could press further. She did not sleep easily. Rain came in bursts. Sometime after midnight, she woke to a sound too regular to be wind, a low scraping, as if something paced along the very bones of the house. Then the bell gave a single, heavy toll, deep as the sea floor. Doors clapped in the corridors beyond, bolts thrown, shutters sealed. Altheira crept to the door and laid her palm flat against it. Heat pulsed through the wood, as if a furnace had been stoked on the other side. A shadow moved across the keyhole, too tall for a man, too quick for any beast she knew. She backed away, heart hammering. The bell fell silent. The storm raged on. She pressed her fist to her mouth to keep from crying out. At dawn, she found a folded slip of paper upon her table. No seal, no signature. Only 2 lines, neatly written. "If the bells ring after midnight, do not ascend the tower, for your safety and for his." Her throat tightened around the last word. His. She placed the note in her pocket and carried it with her all day, as if its warning had weight. The house itself seemed to confirm it. She found an iron-banded door at the top of a narrow servant's stair. The lock was blackened, scorched as if it had once been kissed by flame. When she asked Mrs. Penry, the laundress, about it, the woman only shook her head. "That way leads to the tower rooms. They're not for you." "But why?" Altheira pressed. Mrs. Penry folded linen with sharp corners. "Because some doors are kept closed for good reason, and because caring for this house means keeping it that way." Later, in the gardens, she sought air and relief among the rosemary and thyme. She bent to cut a sprig and looked up to find Dareon standing in the archway, silent. It was as if the sight of her doing something so ordinary had drawn him there. "Those herbs will help you sleep," he said. "Mrs. Penry uses lavender, too much of it. The rosemary is wiser." He hesitated. "If you wish, I will have a planter set by your window." "You notice what helps me," she said, surprised at the warmth in her own voice. His eyes flickered, the smallest spark behind the mask. "I notice what may prevent loss. You speak of me as though I am an account to be balanced," she said gently. He flinched almost imperceptibly. "Forgive me." "I would rather you spoke of me as a person," she continued, steadying her breath, "as your wife." For a moment, silence stretched between them, charged as stormlight. His eyes, gray or green or both, locked with hers. Something moved there, fear and want entangled. "You are my wife," he said at last, voice low. "That is precisely why I will not risk you." "From what?" "From me." The truth in those words chilled her. That night, when the bells tolled again, she did not dare unbolt her door. But she lay awake with her hands open on the covers, listening to the storm walk the corridors, and knew the house was hiding something far larger than debt or shame. something alive and bound and waiting for her to choose whether she feared it or him more. The storm arrived like a decision. By twilight, the sky had sunk to iron. Wind raked the moor and pressed its cold hand against the windows. The servants moved with the quick, quiet purpose of people who had learned a drill. Shutters latched, sand snakes pressed to thresholds, lamps turned low. Dinner was brief and strained. Dareon ate nothing. He rose with a stiff nod toward Altheira and left the table without a word. Hollis hovered behind her chair with a lantern until she stood. "My lady," he said softly, "if the weather worsens, the bells may sound." "I remember," she answered. He bowed and withdrew. The house seemed to tuck itself small around her. Rain thickened until it hammered like thrown stones. The hour after midnight tolled from the hall clock. Then, from the tower, the bell gave a single deep note, steady, deliberate, the sound of a law being invoked. Other notes followed, paced and grim. From beyond her door, she heard bolts slamming one after another as the servants locked each chamber along the corridor. This was not panic, it was ritual. Blackthornne knew these nights. Altheira set her palm to the door. Heat bled through the wood. Somewhere above, something heavy shifted, and the timbers gave a low groan. She could have obeyed. She could have lain still until dawn rubbed the night thin. Instead, she took up the folded note she kept tucked in her bodice. "Do not ascend the tower, for your safety and for his," and felt how the warning pressed on both sides of the same truth. She unbolted the door. The corridor lay empty, as if the house had exhaled everyone but her. Lamplight pooled at long intervals, wind threaded under the skirtings. She went on silent feet toward the servants' stair, carrying no lamp, better to be one more shadow among many. The stair spiraled up, tight as a clenched fist. The iron-banded door at the top stood closed, its lock blackened from some old scorch. Heat breathed through the seam. The wood around the strap bolts bore 4 long gouges, fresh and ragged. Altheira laid her shoulder against the boards and pushed. The door yielded by slow, grudging inches. She slipped through the narrow gap and pulled the door closed behind her until the latch clicked. The tower corridor beyond was close and dim, lined with tapestries that stirred without a draft. Candlelight trembled under a farther arch. She followed it to a round room banded with books. A fire worked in the grate like a living thing. Dareon knelt on the floor, bareheaded, braced on both hands. The mask lay 3 feet away, face down, the leather strap twisted as if flung off in a hurry. His shirt had split along the back seam. Muscle ridged and shuddered underneath, cut wrong by some deeper pattern. His fingers had lengthened to something not altogether human. Dark crescents hooked where nails should be. Blue-black veins ran like chilled rivers beneath the skin. His eyes, when he lifted them, held too much dark. For a beat they did not know her. Altheira stopped in the doorway. He jerked as if he'd been struck. "Go," he said, the word distorted by breath he couldn't quite master. She did not. She took a step. Heat rolled from him, not fever, but the heat of a blade fresh from quenching. "Altheira!" He sucked a breath through his teeth and shook his head hard as if to reorder his own bones. "You cannot be here." The house bell sounded again, deep and prying. She saw the marks his changed hands had left in the stone by the hearth. 4 scratches raked down and stopped by will alone. She crossed to him. He flung one hand out in warning. Claws thudded into the floorboards inches from the toe of her slipper. The sound made every muscle in her calves jump. She did not step back. "Look at me," he ground out. "See what comes with the storm. Do not make me prove the bell right." She looked, the hard glitter along his teeth, the mask-shaped pallor at his cheeks. His chest rising too fast, as if something inside him ran at a pace the body could not match. His eyes fought themselves, drowning in black, then clearing a fraction, then drowning again. He turned his head away as if the sight of her were a pain. Storms, he managed between breaths. Midnight, until dawn. That is when it takes me. Not man, not beast, both. That was all she needed. The rest could wait for a time when the storm was not clawing at his blood. She thought of the courtyard, the white flash of hooves, the crush of danger, the way he had stepped in front of her without time to think and less to spare. She knelt very slowly and set her palm against his forearm, where the strange veins ran like black branches under ice. Heat burned through her hand. The muscle jumped in a startle. He went very still. "You should run," he rasped. "I won't." Claws gouged the floor inches from her skirts. He dragged them back with a groan, scoring his own palm instead. Blood welled, then sealed, as if ashamed to linger. "Please," he choked. "You don't know—" "I know who you are," she said. "You are the man who shielded me from a horse. The man who leaves poems and plays sorrow into the piano keys. The man who notices when rosemary will help me sleep. That is who I see." His head bowed. A tremor worked through him. For a heartbeat, the black in his eyes thinned. His breathing found hers, ragged but sinking. In, out, in, out. The fire shifted. Shadows eased. The worst of the heat softened. He sagged, catching himself on his hands, then tried to rise. She steadied his shoulder. Together they made it to their feet. The mask still lay where it had fallen. Dareon bent, picked it up, and held it by the strap. He did not put it on. They descended the stair in silence. At the landing, Hollis waited with a lantern, steady as if he had always known they would emerge together. He bowed low. "The worst is past," he said. Dareon's voice was rough but sure. "It is." Hollis's gaze flicked to the mask in Dareon's hand, then away, discreet. "Shall I have breakfast laid in the East Library at dawn?" "Yes," Altheira said, before Dareon could answer. They walked on. A pane in the eastern door glowed faintly with the first smear of light. The house loosened its shoulders. The moor sighed. In the small blue before dawn, they sat near the library windows, not speaking. Dareon rested the mask on his knee like a thing he no longer needed to wear between them. His eyes, still shadowed, turned to her. "Thank you," he said. His voice cracked once, then steadied. "For staying when you should have run." She laced her fingers with his. "And I will again." Outside, light spread across the moor. Inside, the house exhaled, as though it had been afraid and was trying to learn how not to be. The storm did not gather. It fell. By night, the moor lay under a single black sheet, and the wind shoved at Blackthornne as if it meant to move the house by force. The servants worked with the old precision, shutters latched, lamps dimmed, bolts driven, then vanished into their locked rooms. When the hour after midnight tolled, the tower bell answered in sober strokes that rolled through the timbers like iron dragged on stone. Altheira stood in the East Library with her hand on the doorframe. The house was silent in the way of places that had learned endurance. Another bell. Then silence, except for the storm. She left the library and went directly to the tower stair. No wandering, no hesitation. She set her back to the wall beside the iron-banded door, her escape route if she must run, and listened. Heat breathed through the oak. Something heavy shifted inside, as if the round room strained to hold more body than it had been built for. Claws caught stone. A voice followed, Dareon's and not his, dragged across gravel. "Altheira." The door carried it to her ear. "Stay by the threshold. If I say go, run." "I hear you," she answered, keeping her voice steady. "I'm at the door." A blow shook the wood. Claws scraped down the stone within. His breathing fractured, half curse, half snarl. The bell tolled once more, then fell silent, as if no hand dared ring it again. She pressed her temple to the oak and began to speak, not invention, not comfort, but memory. Words he had once marked for her in the East Library. "There is a light you cannot look at directly," she murmured. "But if you keep it just at the edge of your sight, it will guide you across the dark plain. Walk not at the star, but beside it, and your feet will find ground where you expected none." Inside, the claws stilled. Breath rattled, then measured itself against her cadence. "The path is real, even when the dark insists otherwise," she went on. "Do not hurry, or the night will eat your steps. Keep the light in the corner of your eye, and move as one who means to reach home." A scrape. Deliberate, not wild. He was backing away from the threshold. The heat ebbing through the wood dropped a fraction, from forge to hearth. The storm tested the tower's windows and failed. She pressed on, piecing the lines together as best she remembered them. When memory thinned, she gave him simple, ordinary things. "The rosemary by my casement still keeps its green. The chair by the fire creaks only when it is warm. Morning always comes to the east window, whether the night believes it or not." A long exhale answered, torn, but human. "Again," he rasped, so she gave him the star once more, steady and sure. She breathed in rhythm, and the rough pull of air within the tower fell in step. Once the door jolted, claws striking hard enough to splinter the inner stone. She kept her palm to the panel and did not flinch. He groaned with the strain, and the pressure eased. Minutes blurred. She did not count them. At last, silence. True silence, the kind that belongs to a man exhausted but himself. "Altheira," he said, low and raw but clear. "Open." She slid the key from her pocket, turned it once, and lifted the latch. The door swung inward with the weary complaint of hinges that had done their duty. She stayed in the frame, her hand still resting on the key. He knelt a few paces inside. The mask lay discarded where he had thrown it. His shirt hung in tatters along the seams. The shadows of claws lingered in his hands, but dulled now, not hooked. The black rim of his eyes had retreated, leaving the gray-green irises exposed. Steam rose faint from his skin. He looked wrecked but present, the storm still echoing in his bones. She offered her palm, open, at the threshold. "If you can stand, stand to me." He did, slow and deliberate. When he reached her, he stopped short of touching. She bent, picked up the fallen mask, and set it aside on the table by the door. He let her. "You should keep to the door," he said again, habit more than command. "I am by it," she replied, "and I will run if I must." His head bowed once at that, a concession, or a kind of gratitude. "You remembered," he said quietly. "The words." "You left them for me," she answered. The storm shifted farther off. The tower no longer groaned at every breath. For a moment they stood in the hush, neither crossing the threshold, both waiting for breath to align. When Dareon spoke again, his voice carried no defense, only truth. 4 winters ago, the fever came through the villages. It struck fast. Men who had weathered war. Children barely into their first years. I emptied the stores. I paid silver I could not afford to owe. It was not enough. He told it plain, the boy in his sister's arms too still, the priest's prayers unanswered, the long walk onto the moor when despair left no weight in his feet. I called where the old tales say not to call. Something answered. Not saint, not demon, only the will the moor has always kept. It offered strength enough to break the fever's back, and in return it laid its hand on me. From midnight to dawn in storms, I am this. Not man, not beast, both. "And the fever?" she asked. "It vanished," he said simply. "I would make the same bargain again. That does not mean I do not hate it." He flexed his hands once, wincing at the sting where his own claws had bitten. "I go to the tower because distance and iron keep others safe. The bell sounds so the house will know when to lock its doors. And tonight you held," she said. "Because you spoke," he answered. His gaze met hers, stripped bare. "Because you would not leave me to be only what the storm made of me." "Not because of me," she said softly. "With me. That is the difference." The line of his mouth faltered, almost a smile, almost sorrow. He looked at the mask on the table, then away. Dawn was edging through the narrow window, pearl at first, then pale rose. She reached up and touched his cheek, warm now with human heat. He did not lean in, but neither did he shrink. "Sit," she said gently. "Let the hour pass." They sat on the stair just inside the tower. He turned his shoulder toward the door, instinct still to shield. She kept the key in her hand, her promise of choice, not rule. After a long quiet, he spoke again, voice nearly gone. "I have asked much of you. Distance, patience, obedience to bells. I will ask one more thing. Ask. If I fail one night, if the storm wins me entire, leave me. Save yourself. I can carry my own end. I cannot bear yours." She considered, because she would not waste his honesty, with a thoughtless answer. The key was warm in her palm. The mask lay harmless in dawn's light. "I cannot promise that," she said gently. "I promise to choose. The door is here. I'll use it if I must. But I will not abandon you by rule, when what steadies you is knowing you are not alone." His eyes closed. When they opened, the black had shrunk to human dawn. "Then I will promise this, no more secrets. You will not live with bolts and questions unanswered." Together they rose and stepped into the corridor. No servant waited. The house knew when to keep still. They crossed back to the library. Morning found them there. Light stretched across the moor, pale first, then gold. Dareon set the mask on the table and left his hand on it for a long breath, then lifted it away. Altheira stood at the window where rosemary kept its green in the rain. The storm had burned itself to light. "Altheira," he said. She turned. "I love you," she said, plain as truth. He received it without haste, letting the words rest on him. Then he kissed the back of her hand where her pulse beat. "I will spend my days deserving that." The house exhaled, as though relieved to be believed in again. The bell hung still in the tower, rope slack not in fear, but in peace. The mask lay in the sun, no longer a law, but a relic. And beyond the glass, the moor bore the storm's tracks like a road they had crossed together, guided by a light seen only at the corner of the eye. If you like this story, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel grow. Thanks for watching.